Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable. Welcome to Two Wood for a Wheat. I'm Pat Flannery.
I'm Tony Faber.
On today's episode, we will be reviewing the new Shem Phillips game, a solo adventure, Legacy of You, a game of patient balance between fighting off warring barbarians and building out a canal to save the people of ancient China. Then we will be discussing the elements of the most rigorously punishing games, what makes them punishing, and why we enjoy that punishment.
How you doing, Pat?
I am swell. I just learned that my car has been poisoning my brain with exhaust, and that's great.
That would explain some of your opinions on our feature game this week.
It sure does.
In fact, let's bend the listeners' minds by saying a little thing here, which is that when you're listening to this at the beginning of the episode, this is actually the end of the episode for us, because we record the intro after everything, which enables us to record perhaps a more appropriate intro. The present is actually the future.
Well, that's confusing, but with the gift of foresight, I can say that this is a contentious episode, Tony, and I'm excited for folks to hear it.
Yeah, it is a contentious episode and a good topic, I think, appropriate for the topic of punishing games.
Well, insert cool segue here.
Pat has been called away by his wife, Tina. He is having to retrieve something for her. He is searching the house for it now. In the meantime, I'm going to let you know a secret. Today we're reviewing Legacy of You. And Pat liked this game so much, he mailed it to me. He mailed it to me, poorly, which we'll get to, but he mailed it to me so that I could review it and enjoy his joy at the same time. And you know what? I'm going to rip this game to shreds when we get to the review. He's not going to like it. This is not a fun game. Don't believe what he's telling you. I'm just warning you. I'm keeping my voice down. Okay, he's coming back. Okay. I just told our listeners a few secrets while you were away.
Oh, I get to listen to them later? Goody.
I'm treating you like Mitch because I'm just telling you random stuff about my life at the beginning of the episode.
Unlike Mitch, the episode won't start with this. Maybe it will end with this.
Went to CrossFit for my first full workout because I got a little scared by my heart doctor. Males in my family on my father's side tend to get heart attacks in their 50s. Anyway, my legs are jelly at this point. Let's just put it that way.
Two things. One, if you haven't watched Physical 100, the South Korean fitness challenge.
Oh, no, I actually watched that. That was pretty entertaining.
So you know that it's perhaps the greatest advertisement for CrossFit that one can imagine. And I'm even considering CrossFit now when I thought it used to be for douchebags. I'm like, you know what? Maybe cardio and strength are good together. But secondly, I ran a 3.5 mile, 5.6K for work. And let me tell you, don't start in the back if you're a runner and there's a bunch of walkers in the race, because I probably ran an extra tenth of a mile just dodging between various people walking and not running. And that was a bit of an obstacle course.
You're younger and more athletic than me at this point in your life, so I'm sure you're not particularly sore from that 3.5 miles.
That's right. A 40-something beat me by a minute. I was not mad, but I was like, I need to maybe work out harder. So competition, Tony, getting punished, victory snatched out of your clutches makes you want to work harder.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the competition when I was at this CrossFit thing. They do other things besides CrossFit. They're very friendly. Anyhow, I felt this sort of competitive urge to keep up with everyone and do all the exercises in the same time everyone did them. And I got through it okay, but it's like been hard to walk for the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because perhaps I don't need to prove myself.
Nothing like having your abilities as a general human posed to you in stark contrast to those around you as a way of inciting further activity, pushing you beyond your limits.
Yeah. In other athletic news, I've also been going to Somerset Patriot games. I don't know how much I mentioned this on the last episode.
You mentioned that you were going to attend this, beautiful Little League game, minor league game.
These are not Little League games. These are it's the Yankees AA team. Now, I hate the Yankees, but still baseball is baseball. The baseball games themselves were enjoyable, but the thing I want to focus on that was entertaining was the desperate attempts by the minor league organization, the Somerset Patriots, to entertain you outside of the ball game, which I don't fully understand because I just want to watch a baseball game. But
we're in the social media era where you need to have 6 different things going on at once with 20 seconds maximum as far as the
yes. You cannot have 3 seconds of silence in a baseball game.
No.
And I know I'm making myself sound like an old man yelling at clouds, but more than that, They really need to sell tickets to kids, I realize. That's how they're trying to sell tickets.
Yeah.
Minor leagues, if a player is really good in the minor leagues, they quickly get promoted. So you can't get attached to like good baseball players. So they're always trying something else to keep you there and the kids there. So they have a promotion between every inning. There's some promotion involving kids. Maybe it's they're running a sack race to win a prize.
Okay.
It's like 18 of those various races where your hands are tied up, or, a clothing company is giving a suit to the first person who can dress themselves in a weird costume. The promotions just get weirder and stranger and more cringeworthy as the game goes on. Also, I guess to bring in different types of people, they have these large choirs do the national anthem. And I think I sent you one. The first one was the worst national anthem I'd ever heard.
It was like listening to a hive of bees that had been auto-tuned to one note sing the national anthem.
Yeah,
and the national anthem is across 4 different octaves, so it's impressive that I could actually recognize it as a national anthem, given it was functionally 1 or 2 notes.
If you're old enough to remember the Naked Gun movie, the first one with Leslie Nielsen, and Leslie Nielsen doesn't know the national anthem and tries to sing it anyway as part of how he's trying to infiltrate this crime gang.
Yeah, he's like posing as Pavarotti or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, he sounds better singing the national anthem than these kids do.
Wow.
Yeah, minor league baseball. It's entertaining. You can get seats for like $10, which is about as much as a pretzel costs at a minor league baseball game.
I don't really get the appeal. I mean, I'm already bored in a baseball game, and I tend to activate when something interesting happens. Or, I distract myself with hot dogs and funnel cakes. So the idea of watching like bad players play or inconsistent players where one is really good sometimes and the other ones are really bad most of the time, I don't know if I can do
think
that.
That's a misnomer because these guys are 98% as good as major leaguers at the AA level. It's that 2% which makes them more consistent and over the top. But for the most part, can't even tell. Although the one day I was there, because it was 11 a.m. and because it was a super sunny day, I don't think the players were used to the sun angle of doing that. And in the first 3 innings of the game, they dropped like 3 pop-ups on the infield, which did make it feel a little league-ish.
I don't know why baseball technology hasn't solved the sun. Block out the sun, build a dome, get specialty sunglasses that remove glare.
Build a dome. God.
It's only $1 billion to build a giant dome like that. I mean, they've been building domes since, ancient basilicas in Rome. What's the big deal?
Being out in the sun is the joy of being at a baseball game.
Bring me to the Toronto Stadium. Nice big dome. Can be played all year around, and in the safety and comfort of a 10,000 cubic feet of air conditioning. That's what life's really about.
People go to baseball games because they want to enjoy the weather. If you want to avoid the weather, you can stay home.
Well, you see me staying home a lot.
Exactly. Not a baseball fan. We understand. Anyhow, so that we actually get to do this episode before you have to leave, maybe we should talk about games we've played over the last couple of weeks.
Let's do it. What have you been playing?
Well, as you know, Pat, I was very excited to discover that Bunny Kingdom, the classic card drafting game by Richard Garfield, had appeared on Board Game Arena, and I instantly began many games of Bunny Kingdom with my friends and listeners. And it's mostly a good implementation on Board Game Arena. There are some things that are a little hard to see on the map, like where certain mountain spaces don't connect.
It's 3-dimensional, which makes it strange.
Yeah, it probably shouldn't have gone with 3-dimensional. I mean, you can see most everything except that border, that lava border that separates certain mountains can be tough to see sometimes. But they do a nice job of when you mouse over the different spaces, telling you exactly what's there. You don't have to guess. It tells you how many resources you have in that group of connected territories and how many points it's worth. And you can just mouse over cards you're drafting, and it tells you exactly what's going on with that card. There's some nice functionality there, and it does all the math for you. And doing a lot of annoying basic math is one of the things some people don't like about Bunny Kingdom, and you don't have to do it here. It's a pure card drafting game, and the only actions you are taking really are drafting cards, but it does contain this great spatial element of some of the cards are spaces on the board, and you're scoring for the different orthogonally connected groups you have on the board based on how many cities you've built in that area and also how many different types of resources that area's been producing. And it contrasts with the endgame scoring card part of the scoring, of which there are many in this game. And so you can really mix and match and tailor your strategies. There's some hate drafting, but not that much. There's some delicious decisions. You're drafting 2 cards at a time, which also really keeps it moving along, especially in an asynchronous turn-based Board Game Arena game. But there's some really great decisions about, ooh, I need 3 cards desperately to make my strategy work, but I can only take 2 of them. Or I need both of these cards, but there's no way I can let Pat get that other card. There are some wonderful decisions, and it's wonderfully satisfying when that perfect card comes in and links up your 2 groups of territories. And so I've been enjoying myself. There's a lot of luck in it, like most card drafting games, but it moves along at a breezy pace. It's got great artwork. It's fun. I recommend, if you never gave Bunny Kingdom a shot over the table, check it out on Board Game Arena.
Yeah, I'm worried about the end game because I have not been drafting any of those end game cards. And
I thought you'd been like, yeah, in our game that you're in is the game I'm probably doing worst in, and I have like no end game cards either. I think Nikki's drafted like 12 of them and will win in the end.
And she's also, I think, ahead inside of in-game scoring as well. So
no, I'm ahead in the in-game scoring, but it's not going to hold up.
No. It never does. I like the expansion with the rainbow board that you can play into. It's just a high density, high value play that allows you to interlink between the main board and this rainbow board and get super high value stuff that's, very risky to go for and hard to connect to. But if you get it, you're going to really pay off. I like that high risk, high reward rainbow board in the expansion.
I haven't played it. I'm not particularly interested like most expansions, but I can't really claim knowledge of it. But it's not on Board Game Arena, to be clear.
Not yet. What else?
What about you? Well, you take one, Pat. Yeah, I this is how it goes. I pick one, and now you pick one.
And I pick one. Similar to you, I've been playing a lot of Ark Nova on Board Game Arena. And
I have not been playing a lot of Ark Nova, so similar to you, I'm not sure what that was applying to.
Just a platform.
Playing games on Board Game Arena
Just a platform.
General?
Yes, that's right. But it's been a lot of solo games. I've gotten to be a better player based off of the solo games because I've realized, wait a minute, Ark Nova is more than anything else a race game. And it's not about the starting cards that you get. It's not about the goals as far as whether it's to, get Africa icons or whether it's, getting Europe icons. It's really about the card sequencing more than anything else. And the better that it can do the card sequencing, and when an opportunity arises, you have the ability to utilize the right action card and getting the X's that allow you to have full navigability and choose any card that you want. That is what wins you the game. So I've been playing a good amount of asynchronous games against other players, and I'm finding that I'm winning quite a lot. And a big part of that is just focusing not on what's out there, not on the cards that are in the display, not even necessarily on the goals that give you conservation points, so much as what cards are out there that are going to generate conservation early, what cards are out there that are going to generate a lot of appeal that are going to give me money, and how do I keep my engine moving? That is what the game is about. It's about not having dead turns. And for that, I like the game even more. I think it's even better than I thought I did. The randomness bothers me even less. It's just how do you deal with the randomness and make sure that you have the opportunities to take the beneficial cards when you can.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying that. If I appeared distracted during your recitation of your enjoyment of Ark Nova, it's because I'm trying to keep my dogs in line at the same time I talk and listen. And because I can't reach them on the floor, I'm actually petting them with my feet as I'm speaking to you.
I thought I saw you extending your foot in a, happy gesture towards perhaps a floppy animal on the ground. I know that particular ballet bend. I think, yeah, it's like an arabesque, little more toe action.
Yeah, hopefully there won't be too many barks for you to edit out of this episode.
I hope not.
For myself and other games, it's mostly been the stuff that I've talked about a lot. More games of Applejack, another game of Earth, which was a complete disaster. And I know I was losing 30 seconds into the game, and I had to play it asynchronously for like another week. More games of It's a Wonderful World, which is only worth mentioning because I've been engaged in a tournament like the Melbourne Grand Prix, which I've never really done on Board Game Arena. And I've made it in like a 90-person game to the finals. But because people have not been playing their games fast on the other side of the bracket, it looks like it'll be another like 3 weeks before we actually play the finals. Although my opponent, I think, because he's already reached the semis over in that bracket, is going to be the best player in the world. And a guy who actually put out a video about It's a Wonderful World, which inspired me to get good at the game. He's probably going to crush me in the finals. So it's been a nice run, though.
That's what you got for playing against Australians, that 0.1 second delay in them communicating their turns. That's really going to add up.
I don't think it's really mostly Australians, although the best player in the world does happen to be an Australian.
See?
But he's already reached the semis. We're waiting for other people who are still like in the second round over in that bracket. That's the problem with doing one of these bracketed things is if you give 4 days to play a game, some people will get the game done in 20 minutes and other people will take the full 4 days.
Yeah.
And the tournament finishes at the rate of the slowest player.
I would lose within my first game having forgotten what my strategy was, so not for me. I got some more Frosthaven to the table, Tony, and I was finally able to retire two of my characters, the fabled Frozen Fist and the punky Pain Conduit, and I retired them and opened four new buildings, and I'm at Prosperity 7, and I can see hints of an interesting endgame that's bringing me back to it. What is this strange solo mission and quest at the end? What is this?
Have you broken open some of the missions from either completing or pretending to complete those weird
journal entries?
Puzzles and journal entries?
Not yet. I have a building to build, and that building that I build will allow me to complete a new quest, and that new quest will allow me to make one more page jump inside of the journal entry. I'm hoping that I'm nearing the end game. It's hard to say, getting toggled by this journal. Suffice to say, I had fun with the system, and I'm excited to open up two new characters, which I won't despoil you right now, but I'm happy to be progressing in Frosthaven after a lot of slow moments with it.
Well, I haven't been playing Frosthaven in part because I'm just stuck where I am. And I don't mean stuck like mentally stuck. I mean, rules as written, I can't play any more scenarios. The ridiculous journal entry system has basically shut me out of the completing the whole game. I'm probably, when you say we're going to do a final review, I will pretend that I've completed a bunch of journal stuff and do some endgame scenarios.
No, just cheat. Just cheat.
Well, exactly. Spoiler, I am not going to be kind about the journal system in our final review of Frosthaven.
Nor am I. Well, that's all from me. I'm excited to talk about a particularly difficult and challenging solo game, which is Legacy of You.
Legacy of You from...
Not you. Not me. You.
You? Why you? It's a 2023 Kickstarter from Shem Phillips, who designed Raiders of the North Sea and all of the West Kingdom series and now the South Tigris series games. And this is a solo-only game about, as Pat has said on previous episodes, constructing the canals which will prevent the flooding of the... Is it the Yangtze or the Yellow River? I think it's the Yellow River.
It's unclear. It's based off of this fabled local king that was instructed by the Emperor of China 5,000 years ago to basically stop the inland flooding along the farm plains of ancient China, I imagine, between the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, and to also stop barbarian raids. And it's unclear whether this individual probably is a real individual, but probably somewhat mythologized, therefore a legacy and legend of You.
Yep, so this is a solo-only game in which you are trying to complete a series of canals, and you're trying to do this before either the floods catch up to you, where on the board you've built your series of canals, or various barbarians attack you and either fill up a whole card row or destroy all the cards you're playing, which is what they do if you don't defeat them. And you're trying to get those canals built before one of these bad things happens to you. And you do this by drawing 4 cards each round, and the cards are your villagers, and they give you various resources when you play them. You can also discard them permanently for an extra resource, but this is not advisable to do very often, as your deck gets too small, then the barbarians will destroy cards and make you lose the game when you're unable to draw more. And also, as you build the canal, the later sections of the canal are also apparently very dangerous to the locals, and they destroy cards in your deck as well.
And every time that you shuffle the deck, the flood progresses. And if it ever catches up to an unbuilt canal, you lose the game.
Yeah, so it's a timer. Also, if you don't defeat barbarians, they start taking up more and more of this card row, which is bad because it's more barbarians destroying your cards, but it also means you put out fewer villagers, because on the other part of this card row, you can get more villagers to keep getting cards into your deck and prevent you losing from running out of cards. So what you do with your resources, which you get from your both villagers and income that you get each turn, is that you can spend resources mostly in the form of different color workers to defeat barbarians, which also gives you more workers when you defeat them. You can also spend these resources to build buildings, which are a form of engine building, which either give you more resources per turn or give you these little sort of worker placement spots where you can do various things with the workers that you're getting.
The cards, the character cards, have 4 different uses. You can use them for their basic resources. You can destroy them in order to get a bonus set of resources on top of the basic resources. You can tuck them into tuck spots if you've built certain buildings. And then they also fill up your deck and make sure that the time between resets and the onset of the flood is a little bit longer.
Right, and when you tuck these cards, they produce income for you each turn. So along with building buildings and tucking these cards, that's how you increase the income and get more resources, which you're going to need because as you build these sections of the canal, apparently barbarians really are attracted to well-built canals because more barbarian cards will come out each turn depending on how many canal sections you've built. So it ramps up in its meanness and difficulty with if once you're near the end, tons of barbarian cards are coming out each round.
This is also a legacy game. You will be playing between 7 and 13 games. 7 if you win all 7, and 13 if you lose or win a set of 7 and then do the opposing set of 6, right? And each time that you lose a game, you will get some sort of benefit, specific boon to the next game, or it will be an ongoing power, or it will be a bit of both. And then every time that you win a game, new cards will be introduced. Perhaps it's stronger barbarians, perhaps it's a very specific big bad challenge that you have to deal with. And it changes each game, aside from the round-to-round change, it changes based off of the barbarians that come out and the different canal cards that come out during setup. There's also changes as far as the overall story, in that there will be greater or fewer difficulties or greater or fewer boons to deal with the challenges in the game.
Yeah, when you win a game, you get a card which provides you some challenge in the next round. When you lose a game, you get a card which gives you something good in the next round. And I would argue, Pat, and we'll get into this, that those cards are very powerful and have a strong impact on whether you win or lose your next game.
Totally agree.
I mean, we could get more into the weeds on the mechanisms and exactly how you spend things.
We'll get into it. We'll
get into that. I think that's enough to start discussing the game, though.
I'll come out right and say it. No suspense at all. I loved my time with Legacy of You. It's probably going to make my solo game of the year, I suspect. It is a lovely game that I would wake up at, 5:30 or 6 in the morning and have my coffee with. And, the length of the game is manageable. It's maybe 45 minutes. And the storage system is excellent. So setup takes 2 minutes. So, before I even had a coffee or sip of caffeine, it's stupid proof. So everything is in its right tray. And then every single round that you play is a set of given resources and a set of given challenges, and you're extending your resources by completing those varied challenges to ensure that you get additional resources so that you can do as much as possible to stay alive and extend into the next round, to the extent that you're balancing, because every round, the resources that you have may not match the challenges. So every single round is a new puzzle.
Well, Pat and I have reviewed probably about 120 games on our podcast, and we've talked about and given opinions on hundreds more. And this is going to be interesting because I don't think we've ever disagreed as much as we're going to disagree on this game.
Here we
go.
This
is one of the least fun games I played in my entire life, and I never want to play it again. I only played it 4 times.
4
to
times?
be honest with you.
You didn't beat it or lose it?
I didn't play the whole campaign. I was done with the game after about half of one play and played it 3.5 more times. We'll get into the details, and this may come off sort of as a point-counterpoint review, since we're going to be giving you the light and dark of the Legacy of You. But to me, there was nothing engaging about this game whatsoever. I found it very hard to plan anything because so much depended on what resources were required to defeat the various barbarians, which is the essential part of winning the game. And what resources you get is largely dependent on what cards you flip over from your town deck. Now, you can get an income, which gives you certain resources, but whether that income matches what barbarians appear is totally arbitrary and random. So I kind of feel like, great, the colors that I'm getting this round match the barbarians that are appearing. I'm going to do okay. If they don't, I'm not.
See, that's the brilliance of the Ark. And that's why you have to play a whole game before you finish your opinion and set your opinions in stone. I know that once you've set opinion, it's very hard for you to change it. But listen, the first half of the game is all about these different abilities and different resources being very differentiated. Red workers only go to red worker spaces, and it can only be used as red workers when attacking barbarians. White workers can only be used to build canals and build buildings. But as you go along, the game opens up. and there becomes a cross-pollination of resources. Okay, I've built a new canal space, and now I can trade in a white worker and a provision in order to make any other color worker. And I've now opened up another canal space, and now I have the ability to turn 4 conch shells into a white worker. Okay, so there's this flexibility between different elements of the game, different resources. And then there's also explicit elements of that where you have, I think that they're the farmhouses, where they allow you to equate one color worker to another color worker. So yeah, okay, you've got your whites and your blacks and your reds and your yellows and your blues. Okay, but suddenly build that building and your blues can become yellows, or your blues can become yellows, can become whites. And you've got a certain flexibility, and that lends itself to, do I build a bunch of workers, or do I try to equate my workers? So the game opens up to the extent that on that final round where you build that final canal space, all of your brick and your wood that's been useless for half the game, suddenly you can do amazing things with it because it all equals conch shells, which can be used to buy anything else. And the game just cascades into a flood at just the right moment where you're grasping victory from the jaws of death. It's edge of your seat style stuff.
Well, okay. To be fair, this is not my kind of game. I am not a solo co-op player where I like games that just throw crap at you randomly and that you have to deal with. I mean, I'm not a Pandemic fan, although I like Pandemic better than this game because Pandemic at least has an interesting spatial element and player powers. We'll take that just for what it is that the whole process of the random stuff comes at you and you deal with it is not one that I'm particularly prone to enjoy. So if you are a solo player who likes the Pandemic style, who likes that stuff getting thrown about it, you may feel entirely differently. But yes, stuff does open up. More options do present themselves. However, I found that the options, at least until that last round, are often insufficient to deal with certain threats. It's like, okay, I can change the colors of 1 or 2 of my workers, but if the wrong barbarians have been coming out, it's not going to make the hugest difference. There's still not going to be a way to deal with it. And some of those trades are at a very bad rate, so the flexibility really does come with a cost to it. And moreover, I just found myself not particularly caring. I was not enjoying the flow early on, but I did give it several more games, and I just found that the flow of the game felt the same to me in every single game. I mean, yes, you can build between 3 different types of buildings, and you'll get slightly different incomes and slightly different flexibility. But in every game, it's a march of barbarians which need different color workers to be dealt with, and you need the resources to get those workers. And all you're doing is trying to get the resources to match the colors on the barbarians over and over and over again. And I almost didn't even care whether I could turn in one more thing at the end. You liked the cascading at the end. At the end, you have 4 barbarians that are going to appear at the end of the game. So the game basically says, on the last turn that you spend a really expensive thing building the last canal piece, you must also destroy a whole bunch of barbarians. And that may seem like a culmination of something really hard. To me, it just seems tedious.
Let me pause you because you've made a lot of points now.
Okay.
So
we'll come back to the legacy elements and how that ties into it.
No. Point by point. Point, counterpoint, not point. Okay? So counterpoint to that, this is a game about patience. If you're rushing through and seeing the game as a holistic thing that's a rush to the end, you're going to lose, and it's going to feel like a slog of constant onrush of things coming at you. This is a game about patience, a fine balance between the flood that is rushing up behind you and threatening to catch up to your canal versus the onslaught of barbarians that are coming at you and threatening to clog up your deck, and all of which require some set of resources in order to deal with and rid yourself of, that you have to ensure that you are on this knife point of, do I have the resources necessary to deal with barbarians? And do I take that next step along the canal space that, yes, will open up more worker spots for me, will open up more building spots for me, will give me some new power, but it also allows for one more barbarian to come out each round. Am I ready for that? It is a game of very strategic. When do I make the right decision to move on? Do I have the power gradient necessary to deal with that? I'll come right out with it. The most satisfying part of this game is that arc brought on by this clever subdivision of resources and this gradual cross-pollination of abilities. At the start of the game, white builds things. Colored workers clear barbarians. Wood and brick build things. Provisions get you new cards, but also let you deal with barbarians. Conch shells, they let you do a bit of everything, but as you said, at a disadvantageous trade value. The funny thing is that some resources, they're very limited in one game, so you might try to specialize to get a lot of them during the next game, thinking that they're going to be really useful, and then you realize that you're over-specializing in that one element and lacking in everything else. What can you do with an entire stock of brick and nothing else? Again, this game, it cross-pollinates these subdivisions as you progress, so the resources begin equating to one another. Open up a canal space, and your white workers can be traded to others for a cost. Open up another, and you can build a new white worker. Final canal space, that brick that I talked about. And then the game organically ramps up the difficulty at every single step. More power means more difficulty. So canal cards become a little more expensive, a little more costly. One more barbarian card will come out each round, meaning you'll need 3 to 6 more resources to deal with it, making the ensuing rounds that much harder. So are you ready to flip that canal? You really have to think about it. Are you prepared to deal with it? Do you have the resources? Can you creatively pivot when the next challenge is presented? And that is where the patience comes in. Have you done enough to prepare for your progression? Because if you move too fast on the canal, you will not have the resources to fight the barbarians at the end, and it'll feel like a slog. Move too slow, and the flood is nipping at your heels, or the draw deck is completely exhausted. And all the while, you have to tactically decide, I don't have the resources necessary. How do I flip and ensure that I have the workers that I need in order to fight these barbarians? And the game allows you to pose those questions and flip, yes, sometimes disadvantageously, sometimes at an inefficiency, between various strategies in order to claw victory from defeat.
Well, I get what you're saying. And a lot of what you said comes down to me just not enjoying the same things you do. Because I agree, you have to be patient in this game. And I just didn't enjoy that. There are rounds when you basically have to do almost nothing just to
survive.
Just tread water to get to another round where maybe next round I've got the resources to build the canal. And, I don't like spend 20 minutes calculating because this is a treading water round. A lot of what I guess I found frustrating about that was this round turned into a treading water round, not because I did something wrong in the previous round, but because the wrong random thing happened. I drew the wrong cards, the wrong color barbarian showed up, or worst of all, some bad random event came along in the form of one of the legacy cards from having built something or from something from the previous game.
Or you made a bad choice early in the game, and you know what? You wanted brick, but brick isn't useful to you anymore. And so learn from that.
This is a game, and we're going to talk about punishing games, where if you make a miscalculation early on, you can see your defeat coming about half an hour before it actually happens. And that is also something I don't particularly enjoy. I mean, it was a couple times, if I hadn't wanted to just play through, if I was playing this for pleasure, which I can't imagine doing with this game, I would have just started over halfway through a game that I'd played because I knew I wasn't winning, but I played it for another half an hour to see that thing.
Well, not necessarily. So the game doesn't just punish you for early on making the wrong choice. You can shift, and the game is about pivoting. You might shift your field strategy to right field, and then the game brings out a right-handed batter and switches it up. I don't really know how it works, but whatever. But maybe you have a shortstop, and the shortstop moves over to ensure that you're caught anyways, right? Come up with a plan, and it doesn't quite work, but then you can do a slightly disadvantageous or inefficient method of saving yourself anyways.
And then there are these effects that you get when you win or lose a game. And to me, those determined completely whether I was going to win or lose the next game. All this calculation, this knife edge thing about one resource, well, I still wasn't going to win. And I may get into a little spoilers here in the game. So if you don't want spoilers, cover your ears here.
They're minor. Everything's a minor addition.
One of the things, for instance, adds something which destroys an extra card each round until you destroy it, and it's very hard to destroy in the beginning. So you're just losing cards right out of the gate. It makes that scenario you're playing with that thing there 5 times harder. And you kind of say, you know what? I'm just going to lose this scenario, but at least I'll destroy that thing, right? Or in another game, when you lose, you might get a card that prevents you from having a card destroyed every round. Well, it's going to be hard to lose that game. Now that you've got that thing going, that's hugely impactful. So all these little things that you're balancing on the knife's edge feel small sometimes compared to the determinism of the randomness of whether you won or lost the previous game, or whether as you complete a card, let's say you finish a canal section. Well, if that's a legacy piece, then something happens, good or bad, as you complete that canal section. And that can make the game itself. I had a game on that I lost because I completed a canal section and I was on my way to winning, but the bad thing that came from completing that canal section totally wiped me out. It destroyed one more card, and that meant that I didn't have the 4 cards to draw from the thing in the next round or whatever. You feel like you're doing this balancing, and then the legacy element can completely determine whether you win or lose that scenario.
See,
And
my
then, by
argument
the
there
way,
would be maybe you
yep.
should have had more cards in the deck and not exhausted so many
Well,
cards and destroyed
you
so many cards.
you have to be on a knife's edge, and you
You
have
do.
to make compromises about where you're on a knife's
You do.
edge. And sometimes you make a compromise and said you're on a knife's edge with cards, but it'll be fine next round, except then that random event just kills you in that round.
See, I
Or
appreciate winning and losing difficulty increases because winning the game, a lot of the increases are done organically with like more difficult barbarians or more difficult canals, right? But then sometimes you also get this big bad goal oriented challenge that gives the game more character. Oh, suddenly there's barbarians, but they're also a bit of a spoiler coming out of a headquarters that you have to destroy as well. That's going to be so difficult to take out. And that's the thing that I need to destroy during this game. And it forced me to think about the game at 3 different scopes. One, the round by round level of this balance between the barbarians and the flood. And, like you said, whether I'm taking a patient turn or moving forward. 2, am I actually going to win this particular game of Legacy of You? Yes or no? And then in that, well, at least I destroyed the big bad, so I don't have to deal with that during the campaign, which is the 3rd scope, which is how am I doing in the campaign? Am I winning the overall campaign? Am I making it more viable to win the entire campaign, or am I making it more difficult for myself despite the campaign so that I can win this individual game? And there's a tension there.
there is, it's just not a tension I cared about at all. And a lot of what I'm saying comes to, I didn't really have any caring whether I won, whether I lost. I felt exactly the same. But while we're mentioning the legacy element, I can appreciate the game putting in twists, although I found the twists, as I mentioned, overly determinative. I was not compelled by the text or the theme of the legacy elements. I found the text to be soporific. I mean, it put me right to sleep.
It was non-linear, so it was hard to ensure that the story was there because the text comes out randomly, right? So one text bit doesn't affect another text bit necessarily. And it was flavorful, though. At one point I got a little monkey friend after, attacking a bunch of monkeys. It felt good to get my extra powerful monkey friend inside of the deck. And when he came out, I said, oh, there's my monkey friend. Or, the old man. Or my favorite was at one point you kill a barbarian and he gets a little story beat and he's like, you know what? I'm just a mercenary. Please don't kill me. I'll join you guys. And then he becomes one of your most powerful character cards because he allows you to get any kind of worker that you want. I mean, it's flavor there. I understand what you're saying, but the art is so lovely and full of character. The barbarians look appropriately menacing and witchy or scowling, and compare that to, the character cards, which look, so bountiful and, friendly. And there's character even if there's not distinctly like linear story.
Okay, I think the production was pretty good and the art was pretty good. So there, I said something nice about the game, and we agreed on something.
Yay.
Most of it was, I'm really depressed because the barbarians are destroying everything. Fortunately, I'm getting some more help from losing. I'm really happy we beat some barbarians and are building these canals.
But that feels like my feeling when I finished the game, like, I was so close, but, I lost that one. Oh, it matched my emotion. It resonated emotionally with me when I won or lost the game, I would say.
And that's, I think, the fundamental difference. If people are listening to this and trying to determine for themselves, that's where we felt different. I didn't feel invested when I won or lost. And for me, it was not enjoying the flow that led that way. I found it repetitive and random.
Speaking to the basic mechanisms, because we haven't touched on that too much, I found that there were not too many optimal strategies and that there was lots of ways to pivot to other strategies. There's not many of them. Perhaps there's an optimal strategy to just stuff your deck early and often so that you have fewer flood movements and so that you have more time to deal with barbarians and can take more of those patience turns to build up your engine. But outside of that, you really do have to vary your strategies because of that randomness of what comes out. There is no win button. The game has enough firmly delineated, seated randomness that you'll never have exactly the right resources, and whenever you trade, it will be at a slightly disadvantageous trade loss, right? But, you could go ahead and you could unlock lots of house spaces and tuck cards for income, but maybe it's the wrong income for what comes out. You can have all the brick in the world and have nothing to do with it until the end. Or maybe you have all the white workers you need, but the barbarian cards keep coming and you have no way to translate them to other worker colors. So how do you pivot in those moments? That's really what decided whether I won or lost, was those mid-game pivots. And I'll give you an example. Final game of Legacy of You, I was getting crushed. my deck was way too small, and I was churning through it during reset turns, which were advancing the flood, and it was biting at my heels. On top of that, there were 5 barbarians out and 3 coming in each round. So I was like, oh, this game is a lost. But you know what? I'm going to destroy cards left and right, save off the barbarians. I'll do my best here. And I really did call it off as a loss. But I had 1 story card that I could use to destroy to get 4 extra cards. And I said, you know what? I'm going to lose anyways. This is my final game. I may as well go for it. I was able to build a canal that round using those extra resources, which opened up 2 building sites, which I built on using farms, which let my workers act as one another and also got me 2 more workers. And I was able to push all the barbarians back that round. And then the next round, I was in a better situation. I was able to open up more building sites, further equate my characters, and drive back more barbarians. And the character draw deck was totally gone at this point, but I had shifted strategies and now was able to use any worker as any other worker. So, even if I only had 10 cards in my deck, I was blowing up barbarians out of the water. And I got to the last canal space and opened it up, and suddenly wood and brick were also conch shells, which you can use to trade as a loss for other resources. And I've been accumulating those the whole game because I couldn't use them. And then suddenly I could buy pretty much anything. And I was able to buy all of the resources I needed to defeat all of the further barbarians, win the game, win the campaign, snatching victories from the jaw of defeat. That was exhilarating. It was an edge of my seat moment. I thought I was going to be crushed that game. I ended up coming through slaughter and winning the campaign of Legacy of You.
That sounds really cool. In my games, I never had that experience. I mean, I only played 4 games, to be fair. But in my games, I felt like I knew whether I was going to win or lose 20 minutes before in each of the 4 games.
You gave up. I knew too, but I still won. I knew I was going to lose, but I was wrong.
I didn't give up. I kept playing. I tried my best. So I hope you can hear sort of the differences here in whether this game is for you. Whether you enjoy a tight, closed system, whether you can tolerate a little randomness, wrenches being thrown into that system. I found that the system played similarly from game to game, and I found it played similarly through one game. I was looking for some other twist, like a spatial element or something which gave more of a feel other than just different ways to convert resources to match what was coming. But if you're fine with it, that closed, tight system that's doing a pretty simple, straightforward thing throughout the whole game, then you may end up feeling more like Pat does. And if you're interested in canal systems and fighting off barbarians, you also may have more interest in this game.
More limited selection, but perhaps somebody in the audience finds that fascinating.
If you like the pandemic type of game, you like those co-ops that are really punishing and throwing bad things at you, and you have to really fight in a tight system, more than I do, you may also enjoy this more than me.
Yeah. You know what? I didn't find any unwinnable seeds in this game. I found that it was all due to my own impatience that I lost these games, or my own slowness. Any sort of issue I could deal with if I really pushed through it, I lost it or won it due to my own actions, regardless of how random the requirements were that came out. I found that the game was won or lost based off of my actions. And I felt that satisfying. I felt a good amount of agency. That feeling of the opening up and cross-pollination of the game, and something similar to other Garfield games where you get a slight boost of an additional worker, which allows you to do one more action, which allows you to take out one more barbarian, which gives you one more resource, which you needed to, build that one more canal space, which gives you, one more building site, which allows you to put down one more building, which gives you one more worker. There's a bit of that combo chain element too that allows you to survive further and larger than you thought in this kind of cup runneth over aspect. I love out of these games, and you can go from 1 to 10 without knowing that you're going to be able to pull these things off. And when you do, it feels incredible. It feels like a golden river, Tony.
The thing that surprises me about you liking this game is the fact that you usually like games where you can proactively, strategically plan.
I'm an omnivorous gamer. I reject the single gamer stereotype. I'm an omnivorous gamer.
I want to make this point because I think it's useful in determining whether you will enjoy this game or not, which is that this is a reactive game. You have to react to what the game throws at you. You cannot simply say, I'm going to do X strategy this time and go execute this plan. No, you have to be like a catcher, catching whatever kind of pitch is thrown at that moment. I will add one more thing to throw a punch in Pat's direction, and this is more personal and less about the game, but perhaps my negative opinion was somewhat colored by the fact that I had to spend an hour or so sorting out all the legacy cards in their direct order, which is was a trickier task than it seems because the cards were not really properly identified to be put together from a jumble. They were more just identified in groups that they came in. And this was because Pat, to his credit, generously mailed me this game because he wanted me to get involved and review it, except Pat does not fully understand the packing process.
They were going to charge me $6 for bubble wrap. It's robbery.
$6. Well, then maybe you should have just stuffed some newspaper in before you got there, because what Pat did was he took the box, and this is a box with cards just sitting up in slots, not packed away in containers or anything, just upright in slots, and put that box with the cards just loose like that in a mailing box 4 times the size of the game box. And so you can imagine that the game arrived with every card and piece in a random part of that mailing box.
I think admin is fun.
So I think learning how to do mailing process and packing a package, that can be fun too.
So Legacy of You, blame the U.S. Postal Service or, I guess, Patrick Flannery for Tony's disenjoyment. That's
anyway.
what I'm hearing.
Okay, well, that's our very contrasting opinions about the Legacy of You.
A punishing game that we can agree on.
So we're back with punishing games, and I believe we had originally decided to call this the elements of punishing games, which I think is an important distinction, because I think definitions and elements are critical, because we may think we all know what a punishing game is, but I think it's subtle. Something that you call punishing, I might call something slightly different, and makes a huge difference in whether we enjoy it or not.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll talk about many games as examples, but let's define elements of a punishing game. I don't know if we can really just do a general definition of a punishing game. I've got maybe 5 or 6 elements that I think may be included in what makes a game feel punishing.
Well, there are definitely things that make a game feel punishing, and those are distinct from things which literally are punishing, I would say.
Yes.
And I don't mean to come down on people calling something that feels punishing a punishing game, but those different things may be enjoyed by different people. So my first inclination was to say a punishing game is one that inflicts negative consequences on you during the game. Even that can be interpreted in different ways. One game, say, we'll call it Agricola, will give you negative points if you don't have a diversity of animals on your farm, right? Another game will give you positive points for having a diversity of something, right? It's the same mechanism, and it feels far more punishing in Agricola.
Look at Ark Nova. They just shifted the scoring mechanism so that you start with non-negative points because people felt upset that they were ending with negative scores because they weren't crossing. It's the same exact game. It's just a perception thing of, are you getting positive points or negative points? It feels more punishing to get negative points than less than 100 points, right?
It used to be that a game would start everyone at 0 points, and if you lost points, you would go negative. And now most games where that's the case will start you at 10 points because it doesn't feel as bad to go from 10 to 5 points as it does from 0 to negative 5.
And I don't think that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, that does qualify in the feels punishing category, but isn't literally punishing. That's why I wanted to make that distinction. Another example of things that feel punishing but aren't literally punishing, and I think this also is somewhat different than that just purely the name you give something like in Agricola, right, is games that are unforgiving. Games where if you make a mistake, you're just going to be suffering with it the whole game. It's not that the game necessarily punished you, did something to you literally. It's just that your mistake, you could say, was punished by the system or the other players very severely. And this is where it's kind of on the edge of feels punishing and is punishing.
Yeah.
Right?
See, I would describe that as is punishing. If that's baked into the system and you're more likely to experience that than not due to your own, you could call it ineptitude, but if it's just like you didn't think through all the consequences of your actions and therefore you suffer, or you didn't think through the consequences of your opponent's actions and therefore you suffer, I would describe that as literally punishing.
Yes, there is a difference, and this is where we're getting into definitions. There's a difference between that, the game that is unforgiving, and then there's a game where you flip a card and it destroys 2 of your villagers. That
Arbitrarily.
Yeah, like in Legacy of You, again, this is not a qualitative judgment, but in Legacy of You, you build one of your later canal pieces and 2 of the cards in your deck will get destroyed. That's literally punishing you. your progress is punished as part of the how the game works, right? And I understand it needs to do that to balance the game. Again, this is not a qualitative thing. Or, one of the co-ops in Pandemic, you flip a card and all these bad things happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's your job to get rid of those bad things and be ready to deal with them. But that's different than you made a mistake. In those games, bad things happening, punishment is kind of
It's baked into
right
the
in
game.
there.
Yeah.
Whereas in other games that are unforgiving, the punishment is if you don't do it quite right. So I'm not saying that the unforgiving isn't punishing. I'm just saying it's a different, little bit less literal style of punishment.
But then we get into kind of bottleneck examples, right? Where it's you versus other players, and there's a right way to do things, but you've got this long, wide bottle. You're setting up, but then one little tight little spigot point that allows you to actually complete that trail of actions to something that's satisfying. And if you don't get through that bottle first, or you don't quite have the ability to get through that spigot, then your effort is wasted. And I would describe that as punishing as well.
Yeah, punishing and unforgiving, I would say, are close cousins. So I'm not going to dispute you.
Yeah. So from that example, where your work, your effort can be wasted, and I think we'll be talking about this game quite a lot, but that's Barrage, right? That bottleneck problem, where everybody's setting up infrastructure of 3 different buildings in order to get water first, and also to run to the electricity generation first in order to pump that water through and climb the electricity track, and perhaps also satisfy a contract. And that generally is I know that there's divergent strategies, but that's generally the way that people will be getting points and winning that game. Barrage is extremely punishing because you can do all of that work and make all of that effort of building out the infrastructure only for water to not flow to you, or for somebody to grab that water from you, or for you not to be able to get to that worker placement spot that allows you to generate the electricity, and your effort is wasted. And that's a punishment for, I guess, 1, being too inefficient in your actions, or 2, not reading the board correctly and the abilities of your opponents to fluctuate your plans.
I think you hit on 2 different things there. One is tight worker placement, which you mentioned, like getting to the electricity generation spot first, right? Yeah, this is where I would argue we're getting away from true punishment as I see it, right? That's bruising competitive game, but I can come back next round and be the first one to that electricity spot and generate it. Whereas if you build a dam that cuts off all the water that's flowing to my dam, that's going to basically screw me for the entire game. And often in Barrage, it means losing the game pretty much outright. Maybe not. Maybe there's pivots you can make, but it's hugely impactful. To me, that feels far more punishing than being beaten to a worker placement spot, which I feel like is just part and parcel of tight games.
Interesting. Right? So you describe punishing games as games where there's a permanent element that is punishing?
I feel like, well, I put it this way. If there's a permanent element to the punishment, it feels far more brutal than getting beat out this round for something.
Yeah, I think of it more as the game structures or incentivizes players to punish one another, let's say, or that they... But I also think that there's the element like the Pandemic where the game is just structured to punish you, right? But Cosmic Frog, for example, there's opportunistic punishment, right? Somebody punches you in the gut and all of the work that you've done is gone. And the reason that is punishing is because it probably took you 3 or 4 rounds to accumulate the lands that you need into your gullet, and it takes only 1 round for the opposing players to punch you and rid you of all of that work and to scoop up those elements from you. That's a structure within the game that encourages combat and fighting each other, even though it's risky, in an effort to punish one player. It's a punishing element of the game in order to encourage player interaction. And it's not permanent either, right? You can always turn around and punch back. It's a permanent mechanism of the game, but it's not a permanent state of the game.
Yeah, and one thing you're pointing to, which I think is great, is the distinction between the game system punishing you and the game system being set up so that other players punish each other.
Correct.
Right? And that's obviously other players punishing each other in a non-permanent way, right? And as we get into segue into what punishing games we enjoy, where we're masochists and where we're not, I notice for myself, I like punishing games where players can punish each other if it takes some real planning and forethought to do that punishment, and you can see it coming and have some ability perhaps to prevent that. So I'll give you an obvious example of a punishing game that I don't find fun. Imagine a take that card game, right, of which we've played a lot, right? That's a punishing game. I don't find that fun because it's really easy to punish people, and there's usually not many ways to prevent that. I play a card, it destroys your thing, right? To a lesser extent, I feel that way about direct conflict games, which I like more, right? Whether it's Cosmic Frog or Blood Rage or whatever, right? Where you go in and destroy the other person's thing. There's some more ability to defend oneself and, take actions against that. But even so, that's not a particularly subtle or deep thinking plan to build up a lot of troops and then destroy somebody else's troops, right? Whereas in Barrage, you have to do a multi-part plan to cut somebody off of their water. You have to build the dam, you have to build the conduit, you've got to build the power plant, and people can see the steps in the process coming. Now, let's say I see you build a dam that's going to cut me off. Well, if you're going to use that, you're going to build this conduit. I can maybe then step in and build the conduit before you do, and now you have no way of really using that dam, and I can use this other conduit to still send things back to my place. It's like a much more sophisticated plan, right? So if you pull it off, its consequences are more damning, and that's not where my judgment comes in. It's that it really required something clever to pull off that cutoff. You know what I mean? Which it usually does in Barrage. It usually takes something. It's like, and that makes you hate the other person more, because it's like, you schemed to screw me for 5 rounds, which the other person did.
They did, right.
And you didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
And you will be punished for that.
Right. And there's a level of player-to-player brinksmanship there that results in something that's ultimately feels all or nothing, right? I think another great example of that is Resurgence with the backdraws. There's a punishment of self because in this game, if you draw the most of a particular worker type, then you will get to advance along a track that's full of bonuses, right? And if you really, really wanted it, you would have committed more resources. The fact that you didn't commit enough resources and the other person won because they wanted it just a little bit more, that feels punishing in a way, because it's counterintuitive, it's inefficient, and it turns out that only the most ruthless player will get what they want. So in Barrage, it's ruthless and efficiency, and in Resurgence, it's ruthlessness and inefficiency.
And what's great about both of these games and how they're connected is the resource cost involved in this, which is nice, right? So in Barrage, you can avoid having somebody cut you off in your water completely. All you got to do is just build at the top of the map where the water first comes out, and you'll get to use it every time. However, that's much more resource intensive.
Right.
So using lower down maps is like a shortcut. I can build dams that don't cost nearly as much, but I'm risking getting cut off, right? So there's that really neat trade-off there, And again, if somebody cuts you off, you kind of have to look in the mirror and say, it was because I was trying to play it on the cheap, but you want to do things more efficiently. So it's a wonderful trade-off. And in Resurgence, it's simpler, but still has that resource trade-off of, I can win this thing, but then I got to take all the workers of this type, and that's not the best thing for my worker placement picks this round, is to pick all workers of the best type. So you're trading off, how much do I want to win win the bonuses from having the most workers in each category, and how much do I want to do the worker placement actions that are just best for me? Right? Same thing of trade-offs involved in whether you're going to open yourself up to punishment or not.
Yes, this resource frugality is the opposing side of the coin. You're almost greedy with resources. You say, I can do more. I can be sparing with my resources to use them for something else. And that's the brutality of it, that it is a degree of one more resource or inefficiency, but it results in an all or nothing situation because you chose not to use that one resource or not.
Yeah. And those, I think, are what makes the punishment elements fun, when you've made a choice which helps you but makes you more open to punishment.
Those other games like Pandemic, the system-based games, sometimes the system's just very punishing. A game where you start closer to loss conditions and the game's random seed throws elements at you that keep you in the red, like Pavlov's house. You start with basically no resources at all, and Germans are bombing you, and the walls are falling, and you have to just outlast the deck. Or certain games of Pandemic where the deck can be stocked with early epidemic cards and that reset it, and you're fighting an uphill battle from the very start. And then if they're punishing because if you are slow to adapt or fail to adapt to the opportunities that are there, you don't adapt, then you die. Those are system-based punishments.
And to be clear about my biases, and this is why a major reason I didn't like Legacy of You as much as Pat, is I don't particularly like system-based punishments, and especially with the randomness of certain system-based punishments. And for me to enjoy that system, it usually has to be in a sort of camaraderie co-op situation where we're all in the same boat together,
Mm-hmm.
which in a solo game I don't really feel. Or it has to be a theme that really gets me and really has me want to engage with that. That's why, like, Pavlov's House seems to me more fun than Legacy of You would be, because I would resonate with that theme of trying to, defend Stalingrad more than I would with building canals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Otherwise, they can feel too punishing. But maybe first we can talk about why we would like these games. Why would we want to be tortured, right?
it's like, we were talking earlier about CrossFit, right? It's something really painful feels good when it stops.
Mm-hmm.
You do that really intense workout and it's going to have good benefits for you, even though it's painful while it's happening, and you feel great having achieved it afterwards. If you've endured all this punishment and then you still beat this tough system, that feels rewarding to people. That gives you this adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
I don't like and a lot of people don't like really easy co-op games. It's like, I feel like I just punched my dog or something. It's like, didn't feel like a challenge.
It's
Don't punch your dog.
so
folks.
easy to punch your dog. Please
Don't hurt animals.
No.
Folks.
Yeah, and you get that edge of your seat moment of, will I, succeed over this knife edge, or will I crash into the cliff? It's exciting.
Yeah.
And then as far as competitive games, I think it creates higher stakes. There's a higher differential between those who succeeded and those who don't. It results in a very clear winner and a very clear loser of the situation.
One disadvantage of punishing games, they can be especially punishing to new players. If you're playing a Barrage or you're playing a Terra Mystica where you get cut off on the map in the first 2 turns and then just have to watch everybody play while you do almost nothing for the remaining 2 hours of the game, it's not, you feel like it's not your fault. I'm just not that good at a learning game. Like a multiplayer solitary live and let live point salad Euro is often better in a first play for people because they don't get punished for making mistakes. They just score less, right? But they still get to do stuff. So a game that punishes you prevents you from actually doing a lot of stuff of the game is one of the ramifications of that. And when it's in early play and that's happening because you just don't know the game system well, that can be an issue for new players. So one of the drawbacks of punishing games that are competitive. Now, if you're playing a cooperative game, then everyone's in the same boat together. It doesn't feel the same way. And you're like, okay, we'll beat it next time. But if you're just the one not getting to play in a competitive game, those games can be much rougher on the play experience for new players.
Well, and to that point, I think that punishment can be a very good teacher, right? It forces efficient play
True.
in a very salient way. Because if on your first play at Barrage, you're 1 round too slow in setting up your power generation, and there's no power worker spots left, you're going to remember that. I know that my games at Barrage have only become more efficient because I've played my early games and been crushed, right? I've realized, you know what, I'm not going to try to get that contract. I'm just going to go with the contract that I have right now, and I'll satisfy that because Tony's coming over, and if I wait 1 more round, then I won't be able to play this space at all. So let's do it now, right? And it can be a great teacher, and if you are willing to endure those painful first plays, it can hammer you like marble into a more efficient player.
True, although I've seen people learn the wrong lessons from being punished in their early games, right? And end up playing too safe and playing mediocre in that game from then on because they don't want that severe punishment. The lesson of Barrage is not that you should never go for the risky dam that might get cut off. It's that you have to pick and choose and not put all your eggs in one basket and only do it when people seem to be occupied with other things, or make sure you're beating them to the other spots as well. You still want to get those efficiencies, right? And the game gives you that incentive to take risks for those efficiencies because those lower down spots are cheaper. You've just got to be more careful and pick your spots with them. So it's funny because, yes, punishment does teach, but sometimes it teaches you to be overly cautious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I also like that it can make games more interactive. It raises the stakes of those potential outcomes. And so, in Cosmic Frog's successful attacks, they are more efficient than gathering terrain yourself. And it is riskier, but that makes this whole thing more exciting. Both as a defender who was gobbled up a bunch of stuff, you're on the edge of your seat and trying to pack it away so that you're in a safe space. And as an attacker who wants that stuff and is coming after that individual, it forces moments of interesting high stakes brinksmanship, edge of your seat style stuff that you wouldn't get without those very punishing differentials of have and have nots after the outcome.
One thing we've enjoyed in Eric Lang conflict games is things that make it less clear whether something's actually a punishment or not. In other words, there's battles where you can actually gain something from losing or maybe not lose as much from losing. And then what gets interesting tactically about those games is this really a punishment if I don't win? And what are the battles I have to win? When I play Blood Rage, you can lose a battle, and if you lose that battle, it's super punishing and probably lost you the game. And there's other battles you don't care about at all, and it's not punishing at all to lose those battles. Sometimes in Eric Lang games, the skill is seeing where you're going to get punished, and it's not always obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to mention a Euro game that is good to mention. I've mentioned it a fair bit on this channel, but not for a while. But it's good to mention because it combines all the various forms of punishment we've talked about, or at least many of them. And that's Heaven and Ale. Heaven and Ale has system punishment in that if you do things like go for points before income in that game, you'll just be doing nothing the whole game. It's just, you can just totally put yourself out of the game with inefficient play and poor choices early on. It has other player punishment in this great race for these special bonus action spots, which are really worth more the later you do them because they're worth points depending on what you've already done in the game. So if you do them early in the game, you haven't done that much. However, there's a limited number of them, and in the last round, there's usually a rush, like just an absolute run on these spots here, and you might not get what you think you're going to get at the end, right? So there's pushing your luck with the other players to get the best spots, but you want them to be worth the most, and your choices about that are hugely impactful. And the game has that false sort of fake punishment thing in that it starts you at negative points. And I mean, basically you have to do well just to get to 0 points, right? And then you start scoring once you get above 0 points and once you're actually doing well. So this threshold scoring system, I mean, you could call it fake in the way that the negative points in Agricola are somewhat fake, but any not so good score is just worth 0 is something different, a little bit different. That threshold scoring feels very punishing to the new player.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And one key element of that game, I think, is the punishment inflicted on you feels at your own agency of, I should have probably rushed ahead to that space where I could do a scoring token, or I should have, made sure to diversify more, and that encourages you to replay it. There are games that feel too punishing either because of the arbitrariness of the punishment, or a false expectation about it does not match how I expected the game to go. If a game feels like Food Chain Magnate does,
yeah,
I know Food Chain Magnate is punishing. I know that there's perfect information in that game, and that a mistake in the first round can be fatal, and that I can lose there by choosing a recruiter instead of a trainer. I know that that's possible. I'm fully aware of it. And so I find that punishment totally explicit and so totally acceptable. Versus if there's a drawing a bad seed in Pandemic early on, and it is a bad seed that just leads to the same exact cities getting hit again and again and again, that feels arbitrary. And it's even worse.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's cooperative, so you can feel that arbitrariness together, and that's fine. But sometimes it feels absolutely terrible because the arbitrariness feels like it's random in a competitive game like Losing Turns and Cosmic Frog. There's an element of that game where it can be stuck in the outer dimensions that feels completely arbitrary, and the action deck is randomly seeded of which players get to take their actions in which order. So I have sat through games where I've been hit 5 or 6 times in a row, and I have no action abilities. My action cards don't come up, so I can't take actions. I'm just getting pounded where everyone's socking me and easily socking me, and I'm losing resources left and right. And basically until I've run out of good resources, the fact is my cards are not coming up. And when they do come up, you roll a die, and it's arbitrary. You need to roll a certain number, and if you don't, then you continue to be stuck in the outer dimension and lose turns. It's also boring not to do anything and see people just do things to you in that game, and that is when the punishment is just too much for me.
Food Chain Magnate. Yeah, I wanted to come back to that game because that's a game, when I did a list of games that I thought were brilliant games, but I didn't enjoy playing, that was the first game that came to mind, because I can see how people accept it. It's all skill based and where that punishment comes to you, like you were saying. And I think it's a great game in that sense. At the same time, most of these games have this sort of arc of where you have these punishment points that you could see coming, and then you can burst past them, and then you know you're not going to get punished, and then you can just build your engine and have the joy of doing the good things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At various points. Whereas in Food Chain Magnate, unless you're playing against poor players, you never get that moment. You always feel like you're a bad turn away from getting totally screwed in the game. You might be running away with it early on, but if some other player suddenly starts undercutting you on price on that key resource, well, all of a sudden you're getting no sales anymore and it's all over. It's just like real business. You know what I mean? The end could be much sooner than you think.
It's all or nothing.
And for that reason, I feel like I never have a moment to breathe and relax, and I just feel tense and worried the entire time I'm playing the game. And so while I appreciate the design, I don't want to feel like I'm going to get punished at every second of the game.
Yeah, it's like skiing down a double black diamond.
Yeah, there's never a respite.
You're soaked in fear sweat by the end and, avoiding moguls and cliffs.
Exactly. You feel good when it's over, but there's never kind of a fun moment along the way. And one of the things I like in my punishing games is I like punishments that are fun. To come back to your sadomasochism. Argent the Consortium, I feel like, is a good sadomasochistic game because punishing each other is fun in that game.
Feels good.
It feels good to cast a spell which banishes three workers back to the hot infirmary or wounds them and sends them all to the infirmary. It feels good to cast spells that do horrible things to the other players. And even when it's done to you, it's not good, but you can come back with a spell of your own. And also because the game scores based on these criteria, which are a little less directly connected to what your workers are doing than most worker placement games, you don't have this immediate sense of, okay, these workers got banished. I'm not going to fulfill this condition as much. I'm not going to have as many points. You don't have that same sense that you do in most games. So it doesn't quite feel as punishing, even if it really is. Mm-hmm. So, we played that classic game of Argent where we're just, forgetting about the score and just punishing each other the whole game and casting spells back and forth. And it was great.
Feels good to punish, and you understand why you're getting punished.
Exactly. If the punishment feels cool and innovative and hilarious, then that's different than the punishment is you don't get to play the game for the next 2 hours.
That's right. Well, that's all I've got to say on getting punished. You got anything else?
No, I think this is a surprisingly rich topic, and we'd love to hear from other people about what punishing games you like and where you don't like getting punished.
Tell us how you like getting punished on our Discord. Shoot us an email at twowoodforaweed@gmail.com. Follow us at twowoodforaweed.com.
Coming up, I think it's going to be Sabika in 2 weeks, unless we decide to throw a curveball, which is always possible. The Euro game from the designer of Bitoku, Herman Milan, I believe. So come back for that in a couple of weeks. Anything else you got, Pat?
Let's start winding down Frosthaven.
Speaking of punishment. Okay. That might be a couple weeks after.
Yep.
That might be coming up soon as well. So we'll see you later, folks, both on the Discord and back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Stay frosty. Two Wood for a Wheat is recorded across the airwaves in Bear Creek, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois. We're produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at twowoodforawheat.com.
It's a circus for me because I'm here with the dogs. Oh, Norman. Norman, who's been recently diagnosed with doggy dementia.
Oh, what is that? Is that a cute thing or is that a bad thing?
Most dogs exhibit some signs of dementia.
Just as soon as they're born, I think.
No, more like as they hit their teens.
Reminds me of Sadomasoc's book, Venus and Furs, where you're just experiencing the dread. This guy basically signs his life away for 6 months to a, ermine fur dominatrix, and he loves it for 6 months, but at one point he gets strapped to a table and, he's about to endure his whipping. And then the dominatrix says, well, Frederick will be taking care of you today. And Frederick whips him. And he says, that is one step too far.